Welcome to Bite Size Rando. My name is Didier Kirby. Today, we're going to be talking all about the Magic Cape, how to use it effectively, and how to avoid soft locking yourself while using it. Before I start into the video proper, I do want to point out that moving forward, all my videos are going to be made using the new Fast ROM setting in the practice hack. So you'll see I have this blue rupee icon in the upper left corner. If you see this on my newer videos, it'll just indicate that I'm using the Fast ROM setting, which means there is going to be less lag in the game overall, because that is what the community plays on now. I want to start off by talking about the differences between the Magic Cape and the Cane of Birna, or the Blue Cane. These two items are very similar in that they both give you invincibility from most damage sources, aside from things like throwing yourself off a cliff, of course. But they are very different in the way that they use magic. So for the Magic Cape, when you start using it, it will have a constant drain on your magic meter until you run out. And with the full bar of magic, you will get around 8 to 9 seconds of cape usage. Now compare this with the Cane of Birna. So with the Cane of Birna, when you first use it, there's an initial magic cost. So when I use the Cane of Birna, you'll see that my magic meter jumps down a little bit. After that initial blip, my magic meter will drain, but it'll drain at a slower rate than with the Magic Cape. Right? So there's an initial big jump, but then the drain after that is slower. So with the full bar of magic, the Cane of Birna will give you about 12 seconds of invincibility. So that is going to be more efficient overall than the Magic Cape. Now, because the Cane of Birna has this initial usage cost and the Cape does not, so you'll see that if I activate and deactivate the Cape really fast, it'll use less magic overall than the Cane of Birna, which uses that big blip. You might be wondering if there is any use case for using the Cape instead of the Cane of Birna if you want to save magic and you're only planning on being invincible for a short period of time. So in other words, what is the kind of break-even point? Well, it turns out it is about this much magic. So if you have around 1/5 of your magic bar, so that is about maybe 1.5 seconds of invincibility, then using the Cape is about just as efficient as the Cane of Birna. And I can show that here by doing a dash here, and I'll show you that the Cape runs out just as I finish dashing across this room with the Cape, and the same thing for the Cane of Birna. Now, this is really not that much invincibility at all. It doesn't last that much time, and in order for the Cape to be more efficient than Birna, you have to be using less magic than this. That's really not that much time at all to dodge anything. So if you're trying to save magic, just use the Cane of Birna, save yourself some thinking and trouble. Of course, one other really important difference is that the Cape will get you past certain obstacles that the Cane of Birna won't, such as these bumpers. And that also includes, of course, the barrier for Aghanim's Tower, which you can get through using the Cape, but not the Blue Cane. Another important difference to note is that while you're using the Cape, you can of course slash your sword, and you can also spin slash. But while you're using the Cane of Birna, you are not allowed to spin slash. You can slash your sword all you want, but you cannot charge a spin slash, so that is something that can come into play on certain boss fights, especially against bosses like Vitreous. And finally, in terms of pure movement speed, using the Cape is generally going to be faster because the initial pause when you activate the Cape is a little bit faster than the pause for swinging the Cane of Birna. This also applies to item dashing, which we'll cover later on. So using an item dash using the Cape is generally going to be faster than an item dash using the Cane of Birna because of that little animation at the end of the Birna dash animation that you have to wait for, this little swing of the cane there. So if you're trying to save magic, Cane of Birna is good, but if you're trying to go faster, usually the Cape is going to be faster in terms of movement, and we will be discussing how to optimize that. Now, something that's very unique to the Magic Cape is that it has an internal cooldown timer. So when I deactivate the Cape, even if I spam the Y button, you'll see that there is a brief period of about half a second where I cannot activate it again, okay? And that doesn't happen with other items such as the Cane of Birna. So Cane of Birna, when I deactivate it, I can immediately repress the Y button and activate it as soon as I can. But with the Cape, there is always that half second of delay. Now, something that's really interesting about this half-second cooldown is that it only ticks down while the Magic Cape is selected, and it persists even across item switches. So what that means is, if I use the Magic Cape and then deactivate it by switching to, for example, the Magic Mirror, that half-second cooldown is not expiring, and it's still saved and remembered. So if I switch back to the Magic Cape and try to use it right away, it won't work. I'll have to wait half a second. So I'll try to use it right away, but you'll see that I had to wait half a second before that kicked in. And this internal cooldown gets saved even across screen transitions, and even if you save and quit the game. So right now I have that half-second cooldown timer, and you'll see that if I save and quit, I'll end up in the pyramid, and if I try to switch the magic cape and use it again, I'll have to wait half a second. So that is still remembered by the game. Now, of course, if you deactivate the cape and wait half a second with the cape selected, then you won't have such an issue because your cooldown timer is remembered at 0. So you'll be able to use the cape right away when you switch to it. So if you've ever had an issue where you have been using the cape and then you did some other stuff, and then in the middle of a boss battle, you try to switch to the cape and activate it right away, and it doesn't work, that's what happened. The magic cape remembers its internal cooldown timer, and it only ticks down when you have the cape selected as your active item. So keep that in mind. Something else that's really useful to know about the magic cape is because the game is notoriously bad at doing two things at once, taking certain game actions will cause the magic drain on the cape to pause. One of those includes slashing your sword. So with this amount of magic in my magic bar, usually I'll get about 1.5 seconds of invincibility. But you'll see that if I use my cape and then spam sword slashes, the magic will drain at a much slower rate, and I'll get a much longer invincibility duration out of the same amount of magic. So this can be really useful during certain boss fights. Turns out that grabbing a wall by going up to a wall and pressing A also pauses the magic drain on the cape. So you can just activate your cape, go to a wall, and hold it using the A button, and you'll see that the magic drain is completely paused, and you're free to sit here invincible for as long as you want. Now, this can be useful in certain boss fights, such as the Ganon boss fight when you're dodging fire bats, but it is also very commonly used for tile rooms, such as this one, where you can just stand in the doorway, wait for the bunny beam, and then go out, activate your cape, and then go to a wall and just grab the wall, and now you're completely invincible, you're not draining any magic, and you can wait around, not having to dodge any of the obstacles, and then once the chest appears, you can uncape and then get your prize. Alright, now we get to start talking about cape dashing, which is really exciting. So you may already be familiar with the general concept of an item dash, where you press the Y and the A buttons on the same frame, and this will have various different effects depending on what item you have selected. A cape dashing is kind of similar to that, but also kind of different at the same time. So what happens when you use the cape is when you activate it, there's this initial pause of about half a second where you cannot walk even if you press directions using the D-pad. But you can do some other things during that pause, such as slash your sword, right? So I can still slash my sword, and more importantly, I can still initiate a dash anytime during that initial half-second pause. So it locks you out of walking, but it doesn't lock you out of dashing. So when you want a cape dash, you can, of course, try and just press Y and A on the exact same frame, and that will give you a cape dash just fine. But I actually don't recommend that. I recommend that you press Y a split second before A. So kind of press Y and then A really fast. So kind of one after the other, kind of like a flan. And the reason why I recommend doing this is because if you are trying to press them at the same time always, and you mess up and you accidentally press A before Y, then your cape won't come out at all, because once you start dashing, you won't be able to activate the cape. So for that reason, I recommend always erring on the other side, erring on the side of caution, and pressing Y a split second before A. And yeah, technically it's most optimal to press them at the very exact same frame, but if you ever mess it up, you won't be invincible during your dash, and that can cause a lot of problems if you are counting on that invincibility for a certain room. Now, cape dashing is really good because it allows you to do an invincible dash with no extra startup frames compared to a regular dash. So you get all the speed of a regular dash, but you're invincible the whole time. Problem is, after the dash finishes, you'll have the cape on, and at some point you're going to need to turn it off, either because you need to save magic or just because you need to use, other items. And when you turn off the cape, there is another half-second pause where you kind of pop back into existence. I'm going to call this little half-second pause the poof state. And as you can see on the left, we're going to be talking about this a lot, because there's a surprising amount of nuance around how exactly this poof works and what you can do with it. Let's first start by talking about the different ways you can poof. So what are the different ways you can turn off the cape? The first and most obvious way is to just press Y again and use the cape, and you'll just stop caping. For this method, it's important to note that you can't do it while you're in the middle of another action. So I can't do it while I'm slashing the sword, I can't do it in the middle of spin slash, and similarly, if I were to bonk against a wall, I can't press Y to uncape until I regain control and I'm on the ground again. And most importantly, I can't do this in the middle of a dash. So even if I'm pressing Y in the middle of a dash, I cannot turn off my cape until I'm out of the dash. This is a little bit different than the second method of poofing, which is to select a different item. So you can do this using the menu, or alternatively, you can just do it via quick swap by pressing L or R, assuming you have that enabled. And then these two are basically equivalent. So with this one, it's a little bit different because you'll see that even if I'm in the middle of the spin slash, I will poof during the spin slash. Similarly, if I were to quick swap in the middle of the bonk, I will poof right away. And as you can imagine or guess, while I'm in the middle of the dash, if I select a different item, I will poof during the dash. This can be really useful. So same thing with quick swap, I can poof in the middle of my dash. Third and final way to poof is to run out of magic. So as soon as you run out of magic, you will poof. And this is pretty much the same thing as menuing or quick swapping away from the cape, with kind of one exception that's not super important, but I will cover that later. So what's so special or weird about this poof state, right? This little half-second pause when I deactivate the cape. Well, during the poof state, you are allowed to slash your sword. You're actually even allowed to use other items, such as, I don't know, if you want to use boomerang, you don't have to wait for that half-second poof state to end. And, most importantly, you can also initiate a dash, so you don't have to wait for poof state to end. But there's one important thing that you can't do normally during poof state, and that is walk around using the D-pad. So while I'm waiting for poof state to end during that half second, I can't walk around using the D-pad, unless I use a technique that I'm going to call the walking poof. Okay, so how do I do this walking poof? So if you use the item select method of poofing, so either using the menu or more often by using quick swap, then at any time during the half-second poof state, you can hold a direction on the D-pad and tap the A button. This does require the boots. If you do that, then you will start walking in that direction that you held for the rest of poof state. I'm going to slow the game down to show you this. Right, so I'm going to activate the cape. Now I'm going to deactivate it using quick swap, and then I'm going to hold left and tap A immediately afterward. And you'll see that I start walking that direction immediately without having to wait for poof state to end. Now, I'm going to be locked into whichever direction I choose. I can also choose a diagonal if I so desire. I think I'm going to be locked into that direction. So even if I let go of the D-pad, I'll still continue going in that direction. And if I try to turn, it won't let me until I have reached the end of poof state and that half-second timer has run out. Okay? So you're kind of locked into that direction. If you want to, you can still change your direction again. You just have to do the same thing by tapping A. Okay? But whichever is the last direction that you go in, it'll be locked in until you reach the end of poof state, and then you can walk around normally. So this can be useful for if you are, walking around using cape, and instead of having to wait for this pause when you deactivate the cape, you can use poof. You can use the walking poof to just continue walking like this. You just have to remember that when you're doing this, you're going to be locked into that direction, right? So you have to be careful. So you're going to be locked into whatever direction until poof state ends half a second later. And of course, if you want to, you can turn again if you just tap A again. Now, it's important to remember that this only works if you have the boots, and it only works with the item select method. It will not work if you use Y. You'll kick up dust, but you won't start moving. So it only works using the item select method. So it works with the menu, and it works with quick swap. And it will not work if you don't have the boots. Okay? Now, before we talk about dashing poofs, I wanted to cover something that I literally just learned about. So normally, when you're using the Y button to poof, you can do it kind of right away after you activate the cape. But turns out if you start charging a dash immediately as you cape, there's a little bit of a cooldown. It makes you wait like half a second. Turns out this period is directly proportional to how long you charge your dash. So if you almost fully charge your dash, it'll make you wait that long. But if you only charge your dash a little bit, it'll make you wait less long, but still not as short as if you didn't dash at all. Here's no dash, here's only charging the dash a little bit, and here's charging the dash some more. So I thought that was kind of interesting. Probably more relevant, if you do a cape dash, it'll also have this half-second cooldown period. And it doesn't matter how long you dash. You can dash across the entire room, you'll still have that cooldown period. But if you use the cape and then wait like a quarter of a second and then dash, that'll reduce the amount of time you need to wait before you can poof using the Y button, okay? And if you wait a full half-second before dashing, you can poof right away immediately after exiting your dash. So it kind of depends on how much time you wait before activating your dash after using the cape the first time. So if you've ever used the cape to, for example, go through this room, and then wondered why you have to wait until you're partway through this bridge before you can deactivate the cape, this is why. By the way, this is not the fastest way through this room. We'll be covering that later. Okay, so now dashing poofs. I actually showed this earlier in this video, but it's really simple. You're going to be dashing with the cape, and then you're just going to poof using the item select method. So you're either going to quick swap, or you're going to use the menu, and you will poof while you're in the middle of a dash. And I'm going to call that a dash poof. And you can do this by dashing like this. You can even do it doing a cape dash. And this is really useful because it basically lets you poof for free. It lets you deactivate the cape without losing any time. So for example, if you're here in this room in Desert Palace and you want to use the cape to avoid these cannonballs, right? So instead of doing this, where you have to wait for poof state, right? And wait for that pause. You see I got a room time of 4:46 there. Now you could use the walking poof. So I'm going to cancel my dash and do a walking poof here. And that'll be a little bit faster. But by far the fastest way to do this room is to do a dashing poof. So I'm going to quick swap away, and that will let me get a room time of 3:56. So way faster because I didn't have to wait for poof state at all. Now it is important to note that as soon as you do the dashing poof, you are going to be vulnerable. So make sure that you've cleared all the obstacles you need to while you're doing your cape dash before you do the dash poof, okay? So wait until you're clear of all the obstacles, then do your quick swap, and then you can dash all the way to where you're trying to go. Now something that's important to understand about dashing poof is that it does put you in a poof state for half a second. Now normally this doesn't matter because you're just dashing anyway, so who cares if I'm in a poof state or not. But if you cancel your dash during the poof state, you'll automatically be put into a walking poof in the same direction. So if I use quick swap and then try to cancel my dash, it'll automatically put me in this walk poof state for the remainder of that half second. Now, if I instead wait for the poof state to run out, right? So poof, wait, and then walk, I'll be able to walk right away. So wait for that half second, and then I'll be able to walk right away immediately. If I don't wait long enough, then I'll still have a little bit of that walking poof left. And if I don't wait at all, I'll have to wait the full half second before I regain control. So if you've ever tried to do a cape dash and then quick swap and then found that you kept on, walking forward even though you wanted to turn upwards, that is why. Now, there's a couple ways we can deal with this problem. So if you remember from earlier when we were talking about the walking poof, we said that anytime you're in a walking poof, you can change directions by holding your D-pad in a direction and tapping A. And that is true for this walking poof as well. So instead of having to do the walking poof and stay going in that direction, we can change our directions using this little dash turn. And that will get you moving in whatever direction you want to turn in immediately without having to wait for yourself to kind of slide, okay? So I'm going to just slow this down. Basically, the inputs are, you're going to do your cape dash, and then you're going to press R, and then hold up, and then tap A right after that. So, cape dash, quick swap, and then hold up, and then tap A, right? So really fast. And at full speed, this basically lets you go straight from cape dashing to walking in another direction. Another way of doing almost exactly the same thing is, this time instead of doing the dash poof at all, we're just going to cancel our dash normally by holding up, and then after that, we're just going to start a walking poof like normal. So we're going to hold up, and then at some point later, press R and A. You can do it right away, or you can wait a little bit longer if you, for example, wanted to keep your invincibility for a little bit of that walk, okay? Now, both of these methods will put you in a walking poof state for that half second. So remember, you won't be able to turn for that half second, but after that, you will regain full control of your walking. And because both of these methods work, you don't really have to be concerned too much with the order in which you press the buttons. You just need to make sure that you're holding up as you press A. You can't press A first and then hold up. Okay? But other than that, you basically just make sure that you're holding up and then press A and R in some combination, or it doesn't really matter what order. So with that in mind, if we go back to this room, instead of first doing the cape dash and then waiting like this, right? We can instead use this new technique and transition from the cape dash to walking upwards immediately. Okay? But it turns out, this is still not the optimal way to do this room. And that is because anytime you're in poof state, you can actually just charge another dash, okay? So this is just like doing a normal dash turn, like this, except you're going to activate the cape, and at some point, you're going to hit the R or L button to quick swap away. And the timing, it's very flexible because you can deactivate the cape early. You can deactivate it right before you do the dash turn. You can also do it during the dash turn. Or you can even just wait until the second dash starts. Okay? It's very flexible depending on how long you want your invincibility to last. So, going back to this room, the actual optimal way is to do 2 dashes in this room, and that will be the fastest way through this room. And ideally, we want to deactivate your cape right after you get past the last cannonball, because that will save you the most magic. So that is the fastest way through this room. Okay, so now you know all these fancy techniques. You're never going to do a stationary poof again, because that's really slow. You're going to do your walking poofs, you're going to do these, chained cape dashes and all that good stuff. But there's still one really important thing you need to know about the magic cape and cape dashing, and that is it can soft lock your game. So let's talk about that, because that's really important to avoid. Now, I've heard some misconceptions about how exactly this soft lock triggers, so I'm going to try to explain it using what we've already learned. Now, remember, when you deactivate the cape, you'll be put into a poof state for about half a second, so there's a half-second timer that counts down. If you screen transition while you're in that poof state, that timer basically gets stuck. So if I do a walking poof across this screen transition, then I will be soft locked. So you can see here I'm in this weird state where I'm kind of moving but not. If I try to press directions on the D-pad, I can't move. So what do you do when you get into this state? Well, if you have any magic left, just use the cape again, and it'll fix you, okay? And if you don't have any magic, you can drink a green potion first, and then use your cape again. That will always fix you. Now, you might try to use the mirror, but it turns out that doesn't work. You will still be in this bugged out state, okay? Saving and quitting obviously does work, but, that is not always desirable. It does turn out that using the flute will fix you, but again, that's often not desirable because then you'll be put into a completely different place. But you will be back to normal after you use the flute. Now, one other thing that you can do that's pretty difficult is you can try to continue playing the game in this state. So remember, what's happening here is we're basically eternally in a poof state. So we're in a never-ending poof state. So just like any other poof state, if we hold a direction on the D-pad and then tap the A button, we'll start walking in that direction. Forever, right? And we can do these dash turns to control our movement like this and turn. We can also do dashes, but of course, as soon as we cancel our dash, we'll be put into a walking poof state in the same direction, just as we learned earlier in this video, okay? One nice thing is that if you slash your sword, or if you use an item, you will stop. So you can kind of use that to stop yourself so you don't always have to be moving around. Now, obviously it's kind of hard to play the game this way, and one really bad danger is if you ever get pushed against a wall, then you're kind of stuck because now you can't dash turn or anything, and pressing A will just make you grab the wall. If this happens to you, you can still recover. Just lay a bomb, and then wait for the bomb to explode you. Okay, so be pushed back, and now you can move again, hopefully, and then you'll be able to continue going on. So hopefully with this, you'll be able to make it along far enough that you can either find some magic so that you can use the cape again and fix yourself, or you can just get to whatever checks you're trying to do, and then hopefully save and quit or flute away. One last thing about playing in this state is I realized that if you die and you're revived by a fairy, you will also get fixed that way. So if you happen to have the fairy on hand, and you can make it to an enemy that will kill you, that will also fix you up. Also, even though mirroring on the overworld doesn't fix this soft lock glitch, mirroring while you're in a dungeon does. So it'll put you at the entrance of the dungeon and your movement will be fixed. So that is also useful to know. Okay, so now that we know what to do if you ever enter a glitched proof state, let's talk about how to use the cape safely so that you never enter one in the first place, hopefully. The first thing you should realize is that if you don't have the boot, or alternatively, if you never press the A button, you are completely safe. And I've seen a lot of people get nervous about using the cape across screen transitions, or deactivating the cape when you're next to a screen transition, or deactivating the cape right before a set of stairs, or alternatively, using the cape when you're climbing up or down stairs. And these actions are all completely safe. And I know a lot of people tend to run into this glitch when they're running out of magic, but if you don't have the boots or you're not dashing, this is also completely safe. So even if I run out of magic immediately before a screen transition, that's completely safe. Everything is fine. And you remember, this is because the only way that the glitch happens is if you transition during proof state. And if you don't have the boots, there's no way to move during proof state, right? You're locked out of moving the D-pad. So since you can't move, you can only do stationary proofs, and that timer will always elapse before you can do a screen transition. And even if you were to, for example, have a bomb hit you or an enemy hit you as you're proofing, that you're still fine because damage can't cause you to screen transition, right? You can only screen transition after the damage finishes, in which case your proof state will be over and you'll be completely safe. If you don't have the boots, you have nothing to worry about. Feel free to use the cape to your heart's content. You are completely safe from this glitch. Now, if you do have the boots, then you're going to be able to do walking proofs, and you're going to be able to do dash proofs. And every time you do one of those, you're going to have a half-second window where if you trigger a screen transition, you will get into the glitch state. Now, you might be wondering exactly what kind of transitions qualify or apply to this. Obviously, I've already shown you that normal overworld map transitions will trigger the glitch. This also applies to these screen mosaic transitions, such as the one in Zora's Domain, so it's the same deal there. It also applies to entering or exiting houses. So if I go in here and I'm in proof state, okay, it looks like that my timing has to be a little bit better, but if I exit out of this house and I'm in proof state, then I will be glitched out. And let's see if we can get it to happen when I'm entering the house. Yeah, same thing there. And this also applies even to dungeons. So if you're walking into a dungeon and you have the cape on, and you uncape, you will be in a glitch state, and same thing for coming out of a dungeon. Okay, so be careful in all of these cases. Now, if you're transitioning between screens within a dungeon, then it's a little bit more complicated, because there are certain transitions which will cause the glitch to trigger, like this one. But there are other transitions which will actually be completely safe. So even though I was in proof state, I'm actually free to move around and I won't have the glitch. And this depends on whether or not the two screens are within the same super tile or a set of rooms. And so, like, when you come into this room on the left, the one with the landmos, is actually already loaded into memory because it's part of the same super tile. That's why the amount of time you spend in this room actually affects the spawn pattern of these three landmos. That's why these three spawn at the same time, when normally they'd be staggered. So when you're transitioning between rooms that share a same super tile, the transition is safe, but when you're transitioning to a different area, so this screen on the right, which is part of a different set of rooms, then that transition can trigger a glitch. It's the same thing in caves. So here we are in Hookshot Cave, and if I go south here, this is a different super tile, so I will trigger the glitch, but if I instead go west, then these two rooms share a tile, so this transition is safe. It's also worth noting that if you ever go down or up these stairs that change floors, that always counts as transitioning a super tile. So these transitions can always trigger the glitch, and this can be particularly nasty because you'll try to keep walking upwards unless you can manage to tap the dash button and start a poof walk in a different direction, okay? Now, going up and down these stairs that kind of just transition you between layers of the same room, this is completely safe. So even if you're in proof state while you go up and down these stairs, nothing will happen to you. And the same thing applies for leaping off these ledges. So even if you're doing a proof while you're jumping down, you won't trigger any glitch. Same thing applies to these pits. In fact, jumping into a pit will automatically just forcibly remove the cape state from you, so this is safe. And the same thing applies to these pits, which will lead you to a different floor, so even if I'm doing a dashing poof, I'll be totally fine when I land. The next question you might have is, how close to a transition do you have to be before a walking poof or dashing poof becomes dangerous? And how far away do you have to be before you can guarantee that they're safe? So for a walking poof, it's pretty easy to judge because you can just do a walking poof and see how far you travel. Remember, the walking poof makes you walk for the entire duration of poof state, and you can't turn during that. That happens to work out to be about the width of this little patch of grass here. So if you see that if I do a walking poof and start within this patch of grass, I'll be liable to trigger the glitch. But if I start from outside the patch of grass, I'll be totally safe. Okay? And in fact, I can actually just turn before I get to the screen transition. Now, for dashing poofs across overworld transitions, obviously you're dashing and you go a lot faster. So that happens to be the width of this grass. So this entire patch of grass is a danger area for dashing poofs. And it's quite a bit longer because, of course, when you're dashing, you move 4 times as fast. So if I start a dash poof while I'm inside this patch of grass, you'll see that I trigger the glitch. But if I dash poof before I get to that patch of grass, then I'm safe. Okay, so if you count, I guess it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tiles from the screen transition. So poofing inside that 7-tile radius is dangerous, but if you're outside of that, then you'll be safe. Now for dungeon transitions, the spacing is a little bit different because of how doors work. For the walking poof, it's actually very difficult to accidentally trigger a walking poof glitch through a doorway. You have to be so close that you actually need to be inside the door, so I can't actually activate my cape since I'm inside the door. I have to first activate my cape, then I have to walk up to the door boundary, then I can activate my walking poof, and that is kind of the only way you'll be able to trigger the glitch. So you see that if I start from outside the door, then I'll be safe. I can, in fact, just walk out the door if I need to. And for dashing, this is definitely more relevant. The threshold is about here, where you see where this Ganon statue is holding the Triforce, the tip of the Triforce. So kind of this line that I'm tracing with my sword, this is kind of the threshold where it becomes dangerous. So if you count the number of tiles, it's about, I guess, 1, 2, 3, 4 tiles from where the door starts. So you'll see that if I do a dashing poof inside that area, then I'll trigger the glitch, okay? Whereas if I start my dash poof before that line, then I will be safe, and I'll be able to move around like normal. So if you're doing a cape dash through a room, make sure that you are about this distance or further from the door before you do a dash poof. And if that doesn't work out for your dash, then be prepared to do something different, like cancel into a walking poof, so that you'll be safe and you won't trigger that glitch. Okay, so now let's talk about what happens when you run out of magic while you're using the cape. So as I mentioned before, this will put you into a poof state, and it is almost identical to a poof that you do using an item select, okay? The only difference is that for some reason, if you run out of magic and you try to do a walking poof from this, you won't move. Because you can see that even if I try to tap A, my sprite will actually try to start moving, but during that half second, I won't actually be able to move. So my sprite will still be animating, but I won't move in the walk poof state for whatever reason. This also applies to a walking poof that you get to from a dashing poof state. So if I start a cape dash, run out of magic, and then try to do a walking, try to transition from dashing to walking, I'll just freeze in place, as opposed to normally when I would kind of slide a little bit further and have to do that walking poof. So in this case, since I ran out of magic, I'm just going to freeze in place for that extra half second. Now, of course, if you run out of magic and you're in the middle of dashing, you will still keep dashing. And in fact, this is probably the most common way that the softlock glitch happens, by dashing and then running out of magic right before a screen transition. And this is really dangerous because normally, if you run into the glitch, by doing quick swap, you'll run into the glitch, but that's fine because you can just use the cape again with your remaining magic and then be okay. But if this happens to you while you're running out of magic, then you're out of luck because you have no more magic to activate the cape again. So this is where you have to be really careful. One simple and reliable way to prevent this from ever happening is, if you ever notice that you're kind of running low on magic, simply use the D-pad to cancel your cape dash immediately before the screen transition, and then walk the rest of the way. If you do this, one of two things will happen. Either you'll have enough magic that you will just cancel your dash normally, and then, since you're no longer in a dashing state, it doesn't matter when you run out of magic, you'll be safe, because as we talked about before, as long as you're not dashing, you're safe even if your magic runs out. The other thing that could happen is you could run out of magic first, so you'll be in the dangerous dash-proof state, but then you're going to cancel it with this weird stationary poof that happens when you run out of magic. And because you're stationary, you can't screen transition during poof state anymore, so you'll be safe, and once that ends, you'll just be able to transition by walking normally. So either way, this works. Of course, this only works with this running out of magic poof, because you'll be stationary. If you try to do this using with the normal item select poof, you'll probably still get the glitch because you'll go into a walking poof, and you'll still do the screen transition during poof state. Alright, finally we get to the real fun part of the video, which is where I get to show off various places in the game where cape dashing can actually save you time or make things easier. We're going to start off with this example in Ganon's Tower, in this room with the cannonballs. I've already shown this earlier in the video, but just worth going over again. For this room, you're going to want to dash poof immediately after the last cannonball that can hit you, and then do a second dash into the door. You'll note that not only is this method, about a half second or more faster than the optimal dashing method, but it's also easier because you don't have to react to the RNG of these cannonballs, because there are different patterns that these cannonballs can be in, and so you may have to adjust your dash depending on the pattern. You can also use the cape in the previous room, so this room with the crystal switches and the moving spikes. So the traditional strategy for this room is to shoot an arrow at the crystal switch, and then with clean enough movement, if you get a good dash, you'll be able to dash all the way through these spikes without getting hit. But you need to make sure that your movement is on point, because obviously if you waste any extra time, then the cycle of these spikes will be off, and then you might get hit. But if you just quick swap to the magic cape, which is pretty close to the bow and arrows, you can use the magic cape and do a cape dash down all the way through, just so that if your timing is off, or if your movement was off, you're still going to be safe. Now for this, the last spike that's going to be in danger of hitting you is over here, and that's not enough time to do a dash poof. So instead, I'm going to elect to cancel out of cape by doing a walking poof to the right. You'll see that I press right and A here as I use quick swap to come out of my cape, and then that way I can do a walking poof to immediately start walking to the stairs, and that way I only lose a couple of frames compared to the non-cape version. Now, it is important to note that if you're also going to use the cape in the next room, remember that the cape has an internal cooldown of 0.5 seconds, and you just quick swapped away from the cape, so make sure you quick swap back to the cape ahead of time if you're going to plan to use it in the next room with the cannonballs. Here's another example from Ganon's Tower, this time near the top of the climb. So normally, here in this room, you'd wait for these two bumpers to clear out of your way before dashing upwards through the mini Helmas. But if you use the magic cape, you can save just over half a second by not waiting for the bumpers. You'll want to do a dash poof immediately after clearing the second bumper, and you'll see that there's plenty of time for you to be free of risk from being in poof state by the time that you reach the stairs. This room here in Turtle Rock is a pretty common place to use either the cape or the Cane and Burna to avoid having to either get hit by or navigate around these large rollers. They do quite a lot of damage, especially on lower armors, and it does take quite a lot of time to navigate around them without getting hit. There are a couple of important things to note about this room. So when you're doing your initial cape dash upwards, you want to make sure to move a little bit right coming out of the door. That is so that you don't bonk on this little railing here, so you need to make sure you clear that railing. Now, as you're doing your cape dash back downward, again, you're going to want to move right so you don't bonk into this railing, and then you're going to want to do a dash poof pretty much immediately after clearing the second roller down here. Try to aim to do your dash poof kind of at latest along this line formed by these two blocks, ideally a little bit above, because otherwise you will be a little bit close to the door and you might be at risk of getting into a glitch state. And one thing that does help here is that since you moved right to avoid this railing, you are offset from the door, and that means when you're dashing into the door, you'll have to wait a few extra frames for your character to kind of slide to the left and then go through the doorway. and that will give you a few extra frames of leeway to get out of poof state, hopefully before the actual door transition occurs. Of course, if you're not really sure and you're not confident of getting this dash poof, you can elect to use a different strategy. You can do a walking poof before getting to the door, or you can just stay in cape through the transition and then do a walking poof in the next room. Alright, over in Palace of Darkness, in the hallway immediately before Helmasaur, normally you have to use the hammer to flip over these turtles and then go through the door, but if you use the Magic Cape, you can save over 1.5 seconds. What you want to do is, coming out of the warp, take a step to the left. That will make it so that when you dash upward, you'll nudge against this little railing, which will set you up for a key dash, so you can dash actually all the way up and through the door. Of course, you'll want to do a dash poof immediately after clearing the second set of turtles. You'll see that you do have plenty of time to do that without risk of getting into a glitch state. When you do this dash poof, you're most likely going to want to quick swap away using the L button, because you are going to want to presumably have the hammer out for the Helmasaur fight. So make sure you are prepared to keep on quick swapping until you reach the hammer in your inventory. In this room, in the beginning of Eastern Palace, you can use a cape dash to go through these cannonballs faster than even the best RNG, where you kind of dash and happen to be knocked upwards by the cannonballs. So it'll be faster than even that case, and of course it'll be more consistent because it doesn't depend on RNG. Now for this cape dash, when you start the second dash, you'll still kind of be within the firing range of a cannonball if you're unlucky. So I think I would recommend waiting to do your dash poof until you've started your second dash, just in case the cannonball comes and hits you while you're charging your second dash. Now, after you come over here and collect whatever's in this chest here, now normally if you have the boots, it is faster to, instead of jumping down here, to dash over to the left here because the cannonballs are in the way. But if you have the cape, it is actually faster to jump down here and cape dash again through the cannonballs, and then walk over to this set of stairs on the left here. That is going to be faster than the set of stairs on the right, even though you're coming from the right-hand lane this time. At some point, you're going to need to do a walking poof to get out of your cape state. I usually like to do that immediately after I clear the cannonballs here, since there's this nice area where all you're doing is walking left, so it doesn't matter that you're doing a walking poof. And you'll see that even with the best RNG here, you'll save over 1 second with this cape strategy. Now, again, remember that after you do your initial set of cape dashes, when you quick swap away, make sure you quick swap back to cape ahead of time, otherwise it'll cause problems for when you try to do the second cape dash here through the cannonballs again. Alright, now this room in Eastern Palace is pretty interesting. This is the vanilla big key chest room. I wanted to use this as an example of when using the cape can technically save you time, but I wouldn't actually recommend it because it'll probably lose you time in the long run. So in this room, the vanilla strat is to damage boost off of this Popo and use the iframes to land on the switch, and then open the chest afterward. Now, if done correctly, this is pretty fast. So fast that if you come into this room without the cape activated, and then activate the cape, remember when you activate the cape, there is a 1/2 second of cape activation, and you can't move during that. It's not like a normal deactivation poof where you can do a walking poof. You have to stay stationary during that 1/2 second. The only thing you can do is like slash your sword or charge your dash. So if you come into this room without the cape, you're gonna have that 1/2 second of pause, and doing that will actually end up being slower than taking these 2 hits and doing the damage boost strat. So if you come into this room, you can use the cape if you want to make things easier for yourself. It might be more consistent and you won't take any damage, but it'll actually be slower, this vanilla strat. So the only way to actually save time using the cape is to rewind back to this room when you are doing a dash through here. And remember, you can put on the cape while you're charging a dash. That is completely free. So we're going to put on the cape way back here when we do this dash. That way we'll have the cape already on when we enter this room. Now we can come, and we don't have to do the damage boost, so that saves a little bit of time. We can pick up this pot, activate the switch, and then as we're walking up to the chest, we can do a walking poof up the stairs so that we save some frames and we don't have to pause for 1/2 second. And if you do all of that, you'll save a little bit less than 1/2 second in overall time. Now, that seems kind of okay, but it's actually not really worth it, because if you look, that actually costs quite a bit of magic. You'll see that I have half magic here for all these videos just because it was easier to set up using the practice hack. So I used, I don't know, almost a full bar, or maybe like a little bit less than a full bar of magic doing this. And even though you might not use magic for the rest of this dungeon, you know, this is Eastern Palace, so you're probably not going to use that much magic for Armos Knights coming up. Remember that every time you defeat a boss and clear a dungeon, you have to wait for your hearts to refill and your magic bar to refill. Now those do happen at the same time, so if you have a lot of hearts to refill, your magic bar situation might not matter. But if you don't have a lot of hearts to refill, waiting for this magic bar to refill actually does cost you time, and it probably will outweigh, in a lot of cases, this measly, 0.4 seconds that you gained here using the cape. So using the cape is never free. Even if it does gain you time, it does cost magic to use the cape, and that can matter. So be sure you're evaluating these things when you're thinking about whether you use these strats. And of course, it's always going to be situational, depending on how many hearts you have, whether you're going to need magic coming up in the future. So be thinking about these things as you evaluate these strats. I already showed this one earlier, but in Desert Palace, this room with the cannonball shooters, they can shoot at different timings, so if you just do a regular dash, there is a chance that you will get hit by the cannonballs and lose time. If you use a cape dash and just do a dash poof after the cannonballs, that'll allow you to consistently dash straight to the chest every time. Something that's nice about this is that quick swapping to the right off of cape will put you on selecting the mirror, and you do always want to use the mirror after collecting this chest if you do have that option. Okay, this one doesn't come up super often, but if you find yourself on Dark Death Mountain trying to go left to Ganon's Tower and you don't have Tempered Sword, so normally you dash through these enemies, but you can't do that with Magic Sword or lower. They do quite a chunk of damage depending on your armor, so you're probably going to want to avoid getting hit by them. What you can do here is, for the first set of 2 Lionels, you can just dash and then walk upwards between them. For the third one, it is immediately in your way, so you're going to want to do a cape dash across the bridge, and then you can walk upwards, and then as you're charging this second dash that goes up this slope, you can cancel your cape. Alright, this one is for Ice Palace when you are planning on doing the Icebreaker clip. This one's pretty niche. I wouldn't really recommend it in most cases, but I'm still going to show it anyways. What you're going to want to do is you're going to do cape dash to the right in this plus-shaped room. And normally in this room, you're going to need to, do a spin slash to get rid of these pen gators, and you're going to need to wait for this anti-fairy to bounce out of your way before dashing into the next room. But of course, if you have the cape on, you don't have to do any of that. If you cape dash into this room, you don't have to wait for the pen gators, so you can just slide to the right, pick up this pot, try to continue sliding to the right, and you'll actually even beat out this anti-fairy. Make sure you toss the pot as soon as you can, and then you'll be able to poof right before entering this door. Now, these 2 rooms are on the same super tile, so you don't have to worry about getting into a glitch state. You can poof relatively close to the door. You might think that you want to do a walking poof here by pressing A and holding to the right, but you actually don't want to do that here. I found that doesn't work super well. What you actually want to do is just hold right the entire time and just use quick swap. Normally you do a stationary poof if you do that, but since you're sliding on the ice, it turns out your momentum carries through that stationary poof, and you'll actually end up snapping into the door, so you won't really lose any time. So it's pretty simple. And you do end up saving maybe a little bit less than a second here. The reason I wouldn't recommend this is because it does use a chunk of magic. Remember, this is with half magic enabled, so you're actually going to use a little bit, use double the amount that it shows here. And you are an Ice Palace, so you're going to have to deal with Cold Stare, and you're going to need magic later in the dungeon. So maybe if you do already have half magic and magic isn't a concern, or maybe you're planning on using Bombos for Cold Stare, you might consider this, but otherwise, this is pretty niche. Here's one in Misery Mire in the room immediately before Vitreous. This one is pretty tricky. Well, this part itself is pretty simple, but this one can be tricky because usually in the room beforehand, you're going to be using the Fire Rod to do your last spooky action glitch by hitting this crystal switch up here by Fire Rodding here. That's a glitch that you can do. And because you have to have the Fire Rod for that, obviously, you're going to need to quick swap quite a few times in order to make it to the cape, depending on your inventory. But if you can do that in time, then instead of having to wait for this fire bar to get out of the way and having to wait for the anti-fairy, you can just do a cape dash to the left. Then as you're starting to charge a second dash here, you can just do a poof during that. And that will save you a little bit less than a second. You'll notice that a lot of these cape dashes are only going to save, a second or here or there, or maybe like half a second here or there. That is going to be the case for this one as well in Skull Woods. Seems really simple, but it does actually save you over half a second by doing this. So instead of having to walk to the right to dash around this bumper, you're just going to go and cape dash downward straight through the bumper immediately through the door, and then that'll give you a cleaner path through this room, and that does end up saving about half a second. Now, in Tower of Hera, there is a dash you can do that will go in between this pit and the collision box of this bumper here. And it is a little bit tight, but you can do it. But if you have the cape and you're not feeling super certain about lining up the exact pixel range here, you can just use the cape and do a cape dash here. And this is relatively free because, again, you're not losing any time because you're just activating the cape while you're charging the dash. And you're going to deactivate the cape by doing a dash poof immediately after this bumper, so you're not actually using the cape for that long at all. So if you're not feeling confident about that bumper skip, I would recommend doing this one. It is relatively free since it uses so little magic. Next up, we've got the Hellway in Thieves Town. So you can try to line up a dash using the middle pixel of this hallway, but this clip is just to show you that if you are really bad at lining that up, or you happen to miss it or something, then you can just cape dash all the way up, and that will help you avoid getting hit by all these enemies. This will also help if you happen to not have a sword or something like that. Now, it is important to try and dash poof on time here. Try to aim for dash poofing around this blue peg here. And note that this anti-fairy here at the end won't really be in your path if you dash right, so you don't have to worry about this anti-fairy hitting you. You just have to worry about these red blob enemies. So make sure you dash poof in time. Remember, you want to be about 4 tiles or more away from the door when you do your dash poof to avoid glitching. And finally, I did want to cover Bumper Cave itself, since this is, of course, a key location where you would use the magic cape since it's required. For getting through this room, again, you're just going to want to do a cape dash and simply just do a dash poof after this bumper. I have found that you can pretty consistently get a dash to kind of slide your character into the exit of this cave. It's a little bit finicky. I haven't figured out the exact pixels that work, but I've found that to be relatively consistent if after I hookshot to the skulls, I kind of hold down and left past the skulls a little bit and then start my dash here. And if everything goes right, you'll be able to slide into the exit without balking on the edge here. I did mention earlier the sort of opportunity cost for spending your magic on the magic cape, since at the end of every dungeon, when you collect the boss prize, you do have to wait for all of your hearts to refill and your magic bar to refill entirely before the cutscene can advance. So you'll see here on the left, we have a cutscene where I had no refill at all, and on the right, I had an entire full magic bar refill, and you'll see that the difference in time is a little bit over 2 seconds. So what that means is if you're spending, say, half a magic bar to gain 1 second of time elsewhere in the dungeon using the magic cape, that is not quite good enough in terms of efficiency. What you really want to aim for is more like spending a third of a magic bar, or maybe a quarter of a magic bar, to gain each second of time using these strats that I've described earlier. Of course, things change a little bit if you have half magics, and your magic will last you that much longer, and things also depend on if you are missing hearts. So you'll see that if I have 13 hearts missing, so there's 10 in this row and 3 hearts in this row, if I have 13 hearts missing, that pretty much takes almost exactly the same time to refill as this small magic bar. What that means is that if you're going to finish a dungeon with 13 hearts missing, it doesn't matter how much magic you have. You can spend as much magic as you have, as you want, and it won't affect the time of this cutscene. And you can extrapolate from there. If you have 7 hearts missing, for example, let's see if I can freeze it. So if you have something like 7 hearts missing, then you can feel free to play around with the first half of your magic bar, since that won't affect your time. But going any lower than that will cause this magic refill to eat into your cutscene time, since that will take longer than these 7 hearts to refill. So this kind of gives you an overall gauge of, whether these magic cape strats are worth it. Obviously, it's going to depend on your overall comfortability with the strats, as well as your best judgment, how much magic do you think you're going to use elsewhere, and how many hearts you're going to have at the end of the dungeon, so feel free to take that all into consideration. Alright, I think that is finally all I have to say about the magic cape, at least for now. Obviously, I didn't cover every single possible use of the cape. I'm sure there are other cape dashes out there that you can feel free to experiment with and try for yourself. There are also myriad other uses of the cape beyond cape dashing, such as in boss fights, fighting Ganon, fighting Vitreous, especially for things like the Master Sword Ganon strat where you use the Samaria blocks. The cape can often be required for that, and so on and so forth. But that is going to do it for now. I know this was a very long video. Hopefully I got most everything right, but it is definitely possible that I misspoke somewhere or said something wrong or left out something. I do try to post corrections in the comments on my videos in case I ever think about something that I left out or something that I got wrong, so be sure to check that. And otherwise, hopefully you have learned something today. I want to thank you if you've made it all the way through this video, and be thinking about these strats and these ways to optimize your cape usage next time that you have the magic cape in your inventory and you find it in a run, especially if you also find half magic, as that does make the cost of the cape a little bit less, so it does make things a little bit more beneficial. That is going to do it. Hopefully you learned something, and good luck in your next run.